In this presentation, we're going to talk about kickoff and competition strategy. We've gotten a lot of questions over the years about how we structure our kickoff strategy, how we're able to frame the game and go through and pick which tasks our robots are going to tackle. And then I'm also going to talk about how we go through and compete at competition and what we're paying attention to and what we're trying to focus on from the strategy side of our team. First, a little bit about me. My name is Sean Stevens. I'm an alumni of Team 341. I was a student from 2009 to 2012. I got the chance to be on the drive team in 2011 and 2012. I went to college at Drexel University right down the road. Got a master's in electrical engineering. Now I work for ASI Drives as an electrical engineer. And I have been the drive coach of Miss Daisy since 2015. When I first came back to Miss Daisy, I was focused on being a strategy mentor. So strategy is really near and dear to my heart. And a lot of the things that you're going to see in this presentation, we've developed over that period. I also do design work and mechanical work. So I'll be giving the next presentation as well about that kind of stuff. So if you have any questions about that kind of stuff, feel free to come up and ask me. Also, as I'm talking through this stuff, it is best if we address the questions like right away. So if you have a question about something I'm talking about, feel free to just put your hand up and we can address it right there. No need to save them until the end, especially if I say something stupid. Feel free to tell me I'm dumb. All right, so let's get into the kickoff process. So on Saturday, which is when we get the game, we do a full team strategy-only kickoff. And here is how we go through it. So the first thing we're going to do is read the rules. All right, does everybody read the rules? Yes. You have to read the rules when you go through the game design or when you go through the game, just so that you can have an intelligent discussion about what you're talking about. Everybody's speaking the same language. We know what the points are. We know what we're allowed to do, what we're not allowed to do. A lot of the times when you don't do this step correctly, students will start talking about crazy ways to play defense, putting flamethrowers on the robot, things like that. It's not helpful for the discussion that we're trying to have. So we want to make sure that we're reading the rules and everybody is on the same page. We really want to make sure that we understand how the tournament is structured. What are the ranking points? How do we score points? What does it take to be the #1 seed or seed high? We definitely want to make sure that we understand all of the ways that we can score points in the game, whether that's scoring low in the low goals or high in the high goals or end game or bonuses or all the different intricate ways that First has made us track our score over the years. We want to make sure that we know about penalties. Sometimes penalties are not like that big of a deal. Sometimes they're a huge deal. So you want to make sure that you know whether that is this year or not. And then we want to make sure that we understand our robot restrictions. We don't want to start strategizing for robots that can be gigantic when the robots are only allowed to be small. So we want to make sure that we have a good understanding of that stuff. The next thing we do is get started on field parts. So when the game comes out, they give you a set of team-style field parts that you can start building. We immediately have parents on our team start building those field parts. So right away, we have volunteers coming in to help us build those field parts so that we can hopefully see the most critical ones on the first day. Because seeing the field part and how the game pieces interact with the field part is so important to being able to strategize for that game. So a lot of the times you can picture how things are going to happen. In 2012 when I was a senior, the scoring element was a basketball and a basketball hoop. That's pretty straightforward. Everybody understands how that interaction happens. Whereas in 2024, the scoring element was an upside down hood that you shot a ring into. Nobody knows what that looks like in real life. So the only way you're going to see that is if you are able to build the field parts and see it for real. So we try to get them done as fast as possible, and we have parent volunteers help us on the first day. We always go through and we prioritize the field parts that we think matter the most to strategy. So using last year as an example, and as you can see these two guys building right here, we thought one face of the reef would be really, really critical to have done on the first day. So that's what we tried to do. We actually didn't build the barge until significantly later in the season because we didn't particularly care about it. And the other thing that we prioritized was the cage and making sure that we had a swinging cage that was at the right height so that we could test what we thought were going to be the most important parts of our robot and see them strategically. Does that make sense? Cool. The next thing we do after we've read the rules, we immediately go play a mock game. So we have some coaches that are actually setting up the mock game immediately after kickoff. So they don't read the rules. They just go right to how the field is laid out, and they start laying that out in our cafeteria. So by the time we arrive, they don't know how the game is played. But we do. So when we show up, we're able to set up the game and play it. This year we used lunch tables folded up to represent the reef. We had nets kind of pulled between them that we used to store game pieces in our main robotics room. And then we built cardboard boxes to represent the cages, and that's how we played our mock game this year. This mock game was so critical for us this year. We did a specific match in this mock game where we said one alliance had to load directly from the human player, and that means that they had to go up to the human player and the human player had to hand them the piece, whereas the other alliance was allowed to throw the pieces out onto the field and pick them up from there. And that exercise, I think, was critical to understanding that a floor intake is going to change the way your robot is able to play this game, and we need to have a floor intake in this game. Because in that exercise, the team that was allowed to pick up off the floor absolutely annihilated the team that had to go to the human player stations. It was like 20 more pieces. So it was really, really helpful. I have a couple pictures from some other years. Here's a 2024. You can see that Jerry here on the left is actually practicing a feeding strategy in our game. A lot of the times in mock games, there are strategies that come up like this that you think might be too complicated for robots to execute on the field. Stuff like feeding in the past has always been hard to balance in mock games because we have really articulate fingers that we're really good at picking stuff up with, whereas robots don't. So humans are better at doing things like passing and throwing to each other than robots typically are. So it's hard to know whether that strategy is real or whether it's a mock game artifact when you do things like this. Turned out to be real in 2024. I think strategies like that are going to be real in FRC now because everybody can pick up and place so fast. But we saw that as well in our mock game. And then the right kind of shows how we did the mock game. The speaker was a tote that was partially opened on the top. There's a piece of tape that holds it like halfway open. And then we used paper plates as our notes for 2024. So that was a great way to play. Here's a couple pictures from 2023. We used red solo cups as our cones. And then we did the bridge with a bar taped to the floor that had some wood pieces on it that they could balance on so that we can get a good idea of what the cycles are like, how people are flowing around in the match, what they're actually going through. Here's 2022. I only had one good picture this year, sorry. But we built this structure in the middle using some of our off-season or outreach robot goals that we turned sideways and made an upper goal and a lower goal. And we were able to see, how the students were able to attack the game. We also had a hanger over here. It's actually upside down. So you had to go down instead of going up just because it was easier for us to do that in the mock game. So I think this is a really good exercise. If you're not doing a mock game, you should really consider doing one. The next thing we do is a weighted objective table. So after we play the mock game, we come back and we want to talk about, okay, what are all the scoring tasks and how do they contribute? When I gave this presentation at Ramp Riot, I did a terrible job with this slide. So I've actually broken this slide up into like 6 different slides that talk about all the little parts of what is going on in the weighted objective table. So the first thing you want to do is you want to list all of your scoring tasks. So every single way that you can get points in the game, you want to list all those. Then you want to go through all of those scoring tasks, and you want to list out how many points is this task worth. As a note on that, for games with limited scoring, like Reefscape was, you want to assume that that ability gets you all of those points, right? So if I can score L4, that opens up 60 points available to me, right? 5 times 12 positions. Whereas if I can score in the net, it opens up 36 points available to me because I can score all 9 balls in the net, 4 points each, 36 points. Does that make sense on the points? The next thing you want to do is how easy this task is designed for. Now, the wording of this is really important. We want to care about how easy it is. So things that are easy get high scores. Things that are hard get low scores. Okay? So we thought the hardest challenge in this game was going to be the deep climb, followed by the net and the coral on L4, which turned out to be relatively true, except the climb was actually easier than we thought it was going to be. And the last thing is how much of an RP is this task worth? And now the way that we do this is kind of confusing, but I'm going to try to walk through this for you as best as I can. So in auto, in order to get the leave ranking point up here, you have to do 4 things. I have to leave, my partner has to leave, my other partner has to leave, and we have to score 1 piece on the reef. So that means leaving is worth 1/4 of that ranking point. It's one of the 4 things that you have to do. Does that make sense? Did you have a question? No? You can also see that the auto corals they contribute to both the auto ranking point and the coral ranking point. So that's why they have slightly more, because they contribute in two different ways. The teleop corals, if I can only score on L1, I can get a quarter of the ranking point because I can do 5 in L1. If I can only score on L2, I can do 5 in L2. And that's how you work through it. And you'll see that the end game, the deep climb, based on how many points it gives you. So you needed, what did you need? 14 points to get the ranking point. So it gave you 12 of the 14 points, 86% of the ranking point if you get 12 of those points. Does that make sense? So that's how we're going through and laying out the basics here. The next thing we do is we want to determine the weights of these columns. So we always use points as our baseline, and that means that points is always going to be 1 in the weight column. And that means that like when we're talking about this, everything we're talking about is related to how many points that we're going to score, right? The next thing we do is we want to find the ranking point weight. And we do that based on the maximum score of the game. So the way that we think about it is if you score the maximum score of the game, you're always going to win, which means you'll always earn the win ranking points, right? So if you divide the max score by the win rank, by how many ranking points you get for winning, you get the point value of a ranking point, which for this year we determined to be 115 because the maximum score we estimated at 345 divided by 3 win ranking points gives you 115. Does that make sense? Then we looked at the ease of design, which this is actually based on just experience, and as we have figured this out, we have found that a value that works for us and that gives us the results that we want from this table is that if we take 5% of our ranking point weight, it's a good number for the design ease weight. And that's determined by us. This is really a column that is determined by like how many resources you feel like you have. So if you feel like you don't have a lot of resources, you should weight that column a lot higher. If you feel like you do have a lot of resources, you should weight that column lower, right? It's just how easy something is matter to me. Yeah?
Is max ranking points given by first the ranking?
So the maximum points scored, we actually calculated that, and several of these things are estimated. So you can get 3 leaves in a match, which is 3 points each, you get 9. Coral auto bonus, we assumed that everybody was going to score 2 pieces on the top level. So that's how we got to 12, because each extra piece is worth 2. Coral teleop, we assumed the whole reef would be full. That's like every single position, all of the coral you start with in the reef. Then for algae, we have, I think, everything in the processor, because that gives you the most points algae-wise. Then we assumed you were going to steal all the opponent's algae and get 3 deep climbs, and that's how we came up with 345. So that is an estimate, and we understand that that's an estimate, but it's close.
And that is ranking points, not normal?
No, that's points. That's points. So we get to the value of a ranking point in points by taking the maximum score and dividing it by ranking points, and then we know like how many points per ranking point. Does that make sense?
Right. I'm not entirely sure I understand ranking points, but I'll ask you about that.
Okay, yeah, we can talk later. All right. So after you've determined the weights, you need to get the weighted sums. So your weighted sums are going to be your potential points times your weight plus your ease of design times your weight plus your ranking point contribution times your weight. And then when you do all that, you will find out your weighted sums. So in the weighted sum column right here, we are assuming that is a qualification match, right? Ranking points matter. We want to get all of our ranking points and win the match, so that these are the things that matter. Whereas weighted sum no ranking points is in the playoffs, when the ranking points don't matter, what is actually going to matter for us. And this chart shows you the things that are super valuable during the quals and the things that are going to be super valuable during the playoffs. So as you can see, it likes things like L1. It likes things like leaving in auto. It likes things like L4 because it's worth a lot of points. So you can see what the table likes and the insight it gives you there. The next thing we do is we do a voted focus. And this has no power at all over the decisions that we make. This is just to get a general idea from our team. Hey, now that we've gone through this exercise, how do you feel about these tasks? What do you think is good? What do you think is not good? And we go through this. This allows the whole team to give input while we're still in a full team setting, but it does not necessarily determine exactly what we're going to do for our robot. But you can see this year we thought the net was not particularly worth it. And you can see that we thought the shallow climb was not particularly worth it. And we were kind of split on some of the like low-level auto scoring, which obviously ended up not mattering at all. But we weren't really sure how to evaluate that. Yeah.
So I guess going back to the weighted sum, this year I remember most of the top teams, they specialize in like higher coral, of course, but here in the weighted sums, it looks like L1 teleop coral was weighted the highest. So
yeah, I'm actually going to go to the next slide. So the weighted objective table tells us what we tell it, right? We told it that we like tasks that are easy, score points, and contribute to ranking points, and L1 does all of those things, right? So it's going to like those tasks, right? Does that make sense? So what this is trying to show you is like, what the weighted objective table shows you is the things that meet the criteria that you gave it, right? And we told it that we want points, easy tasks, and ranking points, and L1 fits that description. So it's not always going to tell you the right answer. It's going to tell you what you told it, right? But it does sometimes help you untangle things like the middle level coral scoring, or like what you want to do in auto, or things like that. It'll help you untangle that stuff and see it for what it really is and how it contributes. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I have a follow-up. So for the potential points, right, like L1 and L4,
Yeah.
if I remember correctly, most of the top teams could like fill up L4 by themselves over the course of the match.
Yep.
Whereas like L1 was a bit more difficult to fill up. So would you ever want to like factor in, like for a limited scoring game, would you want to factor in ease of cycle, or do you just always go like max?
No, the ease is in the ease of design column. So we don't think about that at all in points. When you're thinking about how many points it's worth, in games with unlimited scoring, so like 2024, where theoretically I could score like 400 game pieces if I just shot them over and over and over and over, you basically want to just pick a reasonable cycle number. So it's like, if I think that I could cross the field in 7 seconds, then however much the match is divided by that equals 20 or so cycles, and then that's your number, right? We're just trying to get a number. And as long as you use the same number, it'll all be relative to each other, so it'll all work out. Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay. All right. Let's move on. So that's the end of the day Saturday. That'd be about 5 o'clock Saturday. We'll send the kids home. A lot of the times they will go on Discord and get together and start talking about stuff. And a lot of the times they'll come over to people's houses and think through the game and talk more about it. Encourage them to do that, but obviously you don't have to, because we're back at it again on Sunday. So on Sunday, we split the team in half. Strategy continues with the process, but the build team is going to start prototyping. And I'll talk about that in a sec. Prototyping, what we want to do is learn about the basic interactions of the game pieces as much as we can in one day. So this is like, does it behave as we expect it to when we put it into the situations that we expect? So things that we were really looking at is like, what is easier than expected and what is harder than expected? How does the game piece behave differently than we thought it would? The 2022 game piece turned out to be a lot more bouncy than we were originally thinking that it would be. So that's definitely something that we want to know right away when we're talking about the strategy and trying to lay that out, because that really helps us wrap our heads around like what teams are going to be capable of and what we need to be capable of. Here's a couple pictures from prototyping this year of what we did on day one. You can see they have an intake down here that with just a top set of rollers that ends up actually being relatively similar to the one that made it onto our robot. We just added a bottom set of rollers to that. We were looking at the donut climb on day one. So you cut a hole in the middle of your robot. You have some kind of funnel. You can pull the cage into that and just push it down. So we had that on day one. And then we had some pole grippers to try to grab onto the cage that we were looking at on day one. So these are helpful things to know. Hey, it's not actually that easy to grab this cage. You can kind of get it into the robot, so people are probably going to be able to climb if they really prioritize it. And yeah, you can pick up the coral with an intake that you would, pull out of your head on day one, which were all really, really critical things to our strategy process. On the strategy side, the first thing we do on Sunday morning is small group strategy. So we divide into small groups of about 4 or 5 people, and we want to lay out possible alliance strategies. So we are not talking about robot designs in this. We are talking about alliance strategies. What is the alliance's goal? What are the functional needs of that alliance in this exercise? One of the cool things about this is almost every strategy we come up with in this exercise will happen during the season. So, if I was talking about a defensive strategy where, 2 robots defend a part of the field, or 1 robot defends a part of the field, another robot tries to block passing or whatever, you will see that happen. People will try that in real life and see if it works. And it's great that we have talked about it and evaluated the merits of that strategy before we built the robot. So this lets us evaluate a lot of different things. Normally we have 5 or 6 different groups going through this, and then at the end they will present to the team and talk about what they were thinking about and what the timing is, why it matters, and how they got to that conclusion. Here's a couple examples of some good small group strategy outcomes over the years. We love it when teams are focused on areas of the field that matter, what they're trying to do in autonomous, what the goals in teleop are, how you want the end game to happen. We love that. We love, this one was from 2018. They actually went through match by match every 15 or so seconds, what they expect to happen, what should the state of the scale be, what should the state of the switch be, and how can we do it. This one was specifically focused on if you didn't have a robot that could control the center goal, how could you win the match? And that was a really interesting strategy to walk through and to understand early on in the season. Here are some examples of bad small group strategies. So you can see the one on the left, it's impossible to tell what the heck they're talking about. There's no words, there's no plan, there's no nothing, there's just a bunch of lines. And then the one on the right, obviously, is not what we're going for at all. In fact, I wouldn't even put legs on a robot. The next thing we do is we go into our deep dive questions. And now these are where we really get into the meat of the thing. We want to make sure that we have full understanding of the game in the deep dive section. So what are the scenarios to get all the RPs? These are actually the questions that we ask, this set right here. What are the scenarios that get all the RPs? We need to make sure we know every single scenario. It doesn't have to be a deep climb. It can be 2 shallows in a park, all that kind of stuff. We need to make sure we understand all of those so that we're evaluating our trade-offs correctly. How does the scoring actually work? This is a difficult question because sometimes the scoring doesn't flow in the way that you think it will. For example, this year, I sort of expected that teams would just pull all the balls out of the reef so that they could score, and then they'd go score the balls later, right? Which is not what ended up happening. Obviously, when you have the ball in your robot, you should just score it then, which means that the scoring ends up being algae at the beginning and then coral later. So the scoring profile throughout the match is not what we initially expected it to be, right? The scores kind of jump up as people score the algae at the beginning, and then they jump up even more quickly as you start to fill the L4s, and then from there. So you can see like the catch-up mechanics and all that kind of stuff when you talk through how the scoring actually works. What will the match flow look like? How are people moving? Where do they want their pieces from? Where are they scoring? That's what you need to be talking about on that question. Are there any non-scoring tasks that could make a big difference? Sometimes there are. In 2020, there was a trench run where your robot had to be really low. That's not a scoring task, but it has a huge effect on the robot that you build, and if it matters to you, it's something that you need to pay attention to, so we need to talk about it. Does the game change between quals and playoffs? This year, it didn't change too much. Some years it does change by a lot. But that's what you want to be talking about. Is there anything that I can do differently in the playoffs that I need to be ready for that I wasn't doing in the quals? What parts of the game can be ignored and still be competitive is a big one. We spend a lot of time talking about that question because not that we want to ignore those parts of the game, but we want to know what is the most important parts of the game. So what do we not have to do, and we could still win matches and win events. And you'll find that actually a lot of the game is ignorable if you wanted to. You could be competitive with a pretty small set of things if you really wanted to. But it's important to talk. It's important to talk through that question just to make sure that you understand the trade-offs that you're making and that you make them consciously instead of making them unconsciously. What will separate elite robots from good robots? This is a question we added in the last couple years that has really changed what we talk about. And one thing we noticed in 2023. There were lots of robots that could score cones really well in the top row. And there's lots of robots that could score cones and cubes really well in the middle rows and the bottom row. But the robots that were elite at filling the bottom while also having the ability to do the upper row and middle row. So like it really came down to, okay, who could stuff more at the bottom once they got to that point of the match, which is something that we didn't think about at that time. We didn't know that how fast we score in L1 is going to be critical to our late season success. So that's something you want to make sure you talk about. And then the last one is how can we control our destiny? And the answer to that is almost always get every ranking point you can get. But we need to know what that looks like in this game. Okay, any questions on those? Yeah.
What exactly do you mean by like destiny?
Yeah, so a lot of times a robotics competition can feel like a whirlwind that just kind of happens to you and doesn't happen and that you don't have an influence over, right? And that is what I'm talking about. How can I make it feel like I'm in control of what's happening at the robotics competition? I want to be a robot that can go out and change the match, that can cause a match that should be a loss to be a win. That's controlling your destiny. You know what I mean? I can get the ranking points. I can earn the things. I can win the matches. That's controlling your destiny. Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay. So here's our thoughts from our deep dive questions this year. I'm not going to talk about this too deeply, but you can see that we went through and we talked through the coral scoring, the algae scoring. How much does the algae actually block on the reef if you don't take it out? What are the climb RP scenarios? You can see there's actually a lot of different scenarios, and most of them result in a ranking point. What changes in quals versus playoffs up there, things that are possible to ignore and be competitive, and then elite robots. And the big one that we thought elite robots needed was exceptional performance on L1, which I think turned out to be true. We saw the world champions this year win because they were better at doing L1 than anybody else. So I think that worked out. And lastly, the reason that we do all of this is to come up with our robot will do list. And this is everything that we think our robot has to do to have a successful season. And this list helps align the team. The whole team signs off on this list. They agree. These are the things that our robot has to do if we want to have success. This concept was taken from the Robonauts 118, which is why I took a picture of their robot will-do list from their open shop tour at the World Championship this year. Make sure that you're not too detailed on this. You want to go through and talk about the things that need to happen, not how they need to happen. Strategy should not be prescriptive to your mechanical team. You don't want to say use the L4 ratio. That's not what we need to do. We can trust our mechanical team to figure that stuff out. We want to talk about why we think we should use the L4 ratio. We want to optimize our cycle for this length or whatever. And you should look back at this throughout the season to make sure that you're actually accomplishing all the goals that you set out to accomplish. This year, there was a couple that we put on our robot will do list that ended up not being on the robot. Because as we went through the prototyping process, we realized we can actually do this with another mechanism, so we're going to not include that requirement anymore to simplify the robot. These are our will do lists for the last 2 years. On the right side is 2025. You can see we specifically put in a requirement to be faster on L1 than on L2, 3, and 4. And we specifically had a requirement to pick up from both the human player and the ground, which I think were really important for us. We wanted to be able to align to all of the goals. This one ended up not staying on the robot, be able to hold an algae without compromising the coral. We ended up cutting that requirement to keep the robot simple. There was another one that ended up not making the robot. We weren't exceptionally stable while driving. But yeah, so you can see that the robot will do list turns into the robot, right? So if we do a good enough job defining the robot will do list, we've defined a good robot, and now we can just focus on building it. Does that make sense? And this really sets up the mechanical team well. Everybody signs off on this. Everybody understands what we have to do. There's no inner stress of I didn't want to do that. You want to do this. It's all right here. Does that make sense? Yeah, good. Okay, so for you guys, before 2026 starts, try to do these things. Number one, try to define your kickoff process. It doesn't have to be everything that we do here. I know that we do it really intense, and it doesn't have to be like this. It can just be a couple things. But I think you should consider adding a robot will do list, and you should consider playing a mock game. And then once you define that process, you should do a practice run of your process in the off season. So pick a game from past seasons or a game from the 2021 Game Design Challenge if your students know all the past games. Run a mock game of that, play out your kickoff process, and try to do that during fall training. And get some practice so that the first time you do this is not during the main season where it matters. Okay, any questions? We're going to go on to competition. Questions on kickoff? No. Okay. Competition. Before you get to competition, the most important thing you need to do is align your team and set your goals. So 341, we set 2 different kinds of performance metrics. The first one is expectations, and the second one is goals. So expectations are based on what has happened to us before, and goals are based on what we hope happens to us in the future. So for example, we've had a really successful couple years over the last couple years, so our expectations are pretty high right now. For the last 4 years, for example, our robot has had over a 60% win rate. So our expectation is probably going to be in the ballpark of have a 60% win rate. We can do that with anything that we want. We can do it with the robot awards. We can do it with district points. We can do it with qualifications. We can do it with what alliance we want to be on. We can do it with all kinds of things. Do we want to be the number 1 seed, number 2 seed? We can set an expectation wherever we want for whatever we want. And then our goals are pushing us to get better, right? So for the last couple of years, our goal has been to win the district championship, which is something that we have been unable to do in that time. So that is probably going to stay our goal because it's something that we're pushing to get. But when you set a goal, you want to make sure that it is a SMART goal. So specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-based. So it's not helpful to set a goal that has no time limit, right? Because then it's impossible to evaluate your goal. It's not helpful to set a goal that is not relevant to what you're trying to do, because then you're moving in the wrong direction. It's not helpful to set a goal that's not achievable, because then you feel like you're pushing and you're pushing and you're pushing and it's not for anything, right? I want to feel like if I push and I push and I push that I can get there, right? So that's why it needs to be achievable. You need to pick something that's measurable so that you can look back and say, yes, I achieved it, or no, I did not achieve it. It's hard to say, like, I want to get better. What metric are we measuring that on? What are we getting better at? That's what you need to define. And then you want to be specific. So, like, you want to say what you want when you set a goal. You want to be specific about what you want. If you want to win the world championship, say that you want to win the world championship. Be specific about it. And I think that you should be really honest in your goal setting. All of us do this for different reasons, right? Some of us want to win the district championship. Some of us want to build a cool robot. Some of us want to, program something that is interesting. And some of us want to just hang out with our friends. But I think you should be honest about what you want in your goals, and then you should attack them. So, if you want to just, try to build a cool robot, then when it comes time to design a robot, you should make sure that you're picking things that you think are cool and you're attacking your goals. Whereas if you want to, win the district championship, then you need to attack it in a different way. So make sure you set your goals and that your team is aligned. Because if your team is not aligned and you set goals that don't line up with your team, then some of your team is going to feel really bad and some of your team is going to feel like they were alienated, and that's not good. So make sure you're aligned. The next thing we do before we get to competition is we create a match strategy plan. And one thing that I would tell you that you absolutely have to do is prioritize the ranking points. Okay? What ranking points do you want to get in what matches? So for us, I added our flow chart here. I don't know if you guys in the back can read what it says. But in going for the Coral ranking point this year, it costs you 22 points of cycles, right? Those cycles, as you come down the reef, score you 22 points less than you could have if you went top to bottom. So we decided that we were only going to go for the Coral ranking point in playoff or in quals if we were favored by more than 22 points. So we feel like it's a comfortable match that we can win. If that's not true, we want to focus on winning and not get that ranking point. We don't care. Then the next thing to talk about is co-op on the table? Because if co-op is on the table, that changes how that ranking point happens. So if co-op's not on the table, then we want to still, then we want to focus on winning. And if our partners can contribute more, we want to still focus on getting the ranking point. Whereas if co-op is on the table and our partners can't help us, then we probably still want to go for co-op, but we don't want to get the ranking point, and we do want to get the ranking point if our partners can help us. I'm sorry, bad explanation. And we want to make sure that we get the auto and the barge RP every time. That's our priority. Okay? So that's how you want to lay this out. You want to make sure that you have an order. In our order, it was auto, barge, win, Coral ranking point. That was the straight up order, and then this is the flow chart to get to it. You also want to talk through the stages of the game with your team. Like the team that is sitting in the stands watching your drive team should know what you're going to do. Right? They should know, in auto, we hope these things happen. In teleop, we hope these things happen. In endgame, this should be the end state. Everyone should know what the plan is when you go through, because you've created this match strategy plan before you got there. Yeah.
So I want to go back to the expectations versus goals thing.
Yeah, this one. Yeah.
So you said that your expectations were pretty high considering your win rate last year.
Yeah.
But I'm assuming your win rate last year is going to be pretty dependent on what the event is. So if it's an event that you're not confident in, would expectations change, or are you basing it solely off of?
No, we're setting events for the whole season when we set these goals. So, we're setting goals and expectations for the whole season. So we don't particularly care who we play against. We want to get that We want to set the expectation with that in mind. And we're referencing based on the past where we have gone through a similar set of events where we played, district level, district championship level, then world championship level. So it ends up working out about the same every year.
So is there anything else that would change expectations?
Yeah, expectations could change if our team changes, right? So depending on how our students are trained or how our mentors are set up or if our resources change, then we could change our expectations. If we get $1 million and we buy a ton of machines and we have an amazing shop, then obviously we have higher expectations than if we're working in a closet, right? It's different. You good?
Yep.
Good? Okay. So you want to make sure that you talk through the game. You want to lay out what you're looking for in your partners. When it comes time to pick, the people making your pick list should know what your ideal partners are. For example, last year, we were not awesome at scoring algae. We wanted partners that could score algae really, really well so that we didn't have to worry about that deficiency in our game. And then as you go through the season and you see the game unfold and you see how your robot is performing, you need to make adjustments to your strategy plan throughout the year. Sometimes you're not going to end up playing the role that you thought you were when you started because your robot doesn't play that role very well or whatever. You need to be honest with yourself as you go through and have a match strategy plan that fits what you're trying to do and gives you the best chance of winning. Yeah.
How does your match strategy change depending on your alliance partners?
A lot of the times it doesn't. Ultimately, what I want is I want my alliance partners to be in situations where they're going to perform their best, right? So like if you come up to me in alliance talk and you tell me like, hey, I'm feeling like my algae is really good, but my coral's not that great, then we try to get you into a position where you're playing with as much algae as you can. Does that make sense? But our plan, like how we want to play the game, typically does not change based on what you're going to do. It's just how do we all fit together into that. Does that make sense? All right, so as we go through competition, one thing that we always try to keep in mind is the growth mindset. And this is sort of like the whole thing that we talk about in terms of how to stay focused. What we want to do is we want to be getting better the whole time. All year, not just during build season, not just during competition, we want to be getting better. So when you ask yourself, like, okay, I want to win, right? How do I win? You win by playing as well as you can. Right? And how do you play as well as you can? By getting better. Does that make sense? So what you really want to do is you want to focus on the process that you're taking as you play, right? So when you make a mistake, for example, you want to look at that mistake and you say like, how could I have avoided this? Did I make my decisions with the info that I had at the time correctly? Did I call this right? Did I put a team in the wrong situation? Did I not listen to what they told me in the driver meeting and put them in a situation where they weren't strong? Things like that. You want to look at yourself and ask that and realize that every challenge that you go through is a chance for you to get better, right? So when you tackle those chances to get better, you're going to be able to actually get better, and then next time around, you're not going to make the same mistake. You want to show up to competition, you want to be prepared, and you want to be practiced so that you know when you don't do things the way that you're supposed to, and you can look at them and you can say like, oh, this is where I need to get better, this is how I can do better. You need to be relentless about the details. A lot of the times we're talking about things that are just like really, really minor details that as you focus on them and as you learn from them, they really stack up and can change the way your robot performs on the field. You need to make sure you're learning and correcting your mistakes. And the biggest one is you need to make sure you're going one match at a time. So whatever happened in the match that we just played, it happened. It's over. Doesn't matter anymore. All that matters is that we learn from that and we get better for the next one. That's all that matters. The next one is a completely clean slate where that one doesn't matter. So we're just making sure we take it one match at a time. So that's why I have play to improve at the top rather than play to win, because the best way to win is to make sure that you're always getting better. Does that make sense? All right, let's talk about scouting a little bit. I know I'm getting kind of tight on time, but we'll get through. So we do this kind of structure for our scouts. So we have a scouting coach that just makes sure the operation of scouting is happening correctly. And then we have 2 scouting leaders, one for the Red Alliance, one for the Blue Alliance. Each of them have a tablet where they are recording the qualitative data from that alliance. So that's like, this robot has a really good driver. We think these guys play great defense, that kind of stuff. And then the scouts on the bottom are each on one robot recording what they saw that robot do during the match. So this robot scored 12 pieces on L1, this robot scored 5 pieces on L2, blah, blah, blah. They collect all that data. Then all that data from the scouting leaders and the match scouts and the people who do the pit scouting goes into our scanner app through the API and into a database. I'm not going to get into this. I'm not the guy. Don't ask me any questions about this. But that's how it happens. And we have a kid who scans all that data. It comes out of the tablets on a QR code. so that you don't have to do any internet passing back and forth. So he scans that into the scanner app into the database. So why are we scouting? Which is really, from my perspective, what is important. We scout primarily, number one, to come up with match strategies. That's the number one reason why I encourage our team to scout, so that we can be prepared when we come to play matches. The number two reason is to make our pick list for alliance selection. That is super, super, super important, and something that I think everyone should be prepared for. Even if you don't believe you're going to be in a picking position, I think that you should come into alliance selection with a pick list, because you never know. We also use it to provide feedback for our drive team and to prepare our playoff strategies. So a lot of the times when you're making your pick list for alliance selection, something that gets overlooked is like how you actually want to play in the playoffs, and you have to pick the partners that are going to enable that strategy. So that's another thing that scouting data is really, really valuable for. But the thing that I like it the most for is for our pre-match strategy. So in pre-match strategy, what we do is we actually pull that data out of the database through the scouting API into a match predictor, which looks like this. So this is an actual match from this year, where you can see the contribution of each team in terms of their percentage of their alliance, what they score, how many points they're expected to score, how many coral they're expected to score, and it can let you kind of see the whole match at a glance, what you expect to happen in this match. This also goes into, when we were talking about our ranking point priority. So like we can see that we're favored by more than 22 points in this match, so we would want to go for that coral ranking point. That data is then brought to the drive team by our analyst or analysts. This year we're going to have 2. Last year we only had 1. And we will then go through how we think the match should play out. This is before we're talking to our partners. How do we think the match should play out? What are our partners strong at? What are we strong at? How do we all fit together? Right? So then when I come up to you and we're doing the match strategy, I kind of already know what you're going to tell me, right? Because I have the data that shows what you're good at, and I want you to be good. So I want that to happen. So that's what we're doing pre-match to make this happen. After the match happens, oh, I'm sorry, question.
So you said they put all that qualitative data into scouting API that your team has for some reason. But couldn't this be just relegated to a Google form instead?
It could, yes. What we do is a lot like a Google form. The reason we don't do a Google form is because there's a lot of times where people enter it wrong. Like we've had too many situations where a 2 becomes a 22, and then the data is not representative of what's real. So we, like for probably the last, starting around like 2018 to 2022, we did use Google Forms as our submission, and it works great, except for the errors in entry.
And that's just human error. Thank you.
Yep. So then after the match happens, we do our post-match review. Our analysts will record the match, and they bring it to the drive team, and they tell us what they think we did wrong in the match. It's kind of a process that is humbling. You come back, you think you had a good match, and your analyst comes and tells you that you did 15 things wrong, and that you need to get better for the next one. But like I said, that's the mindset that we're trying to take, so that's what we want to do. So we're looking for ways to improve, and also the analyst is typically in the stands with the scouts, so they can communicate with the analyst and tell the analyst anything that the scouts see that we may not see. So sometimes the scouts are in situations where like, hey, we're talking to this team and they want us to show whatever in the next match, right? So the analyst can then bring that information to the drive team, make sure the drive team understands that and builds that into our strategy going forward. And then after the competition, we want to review our goals. So did we achieve the goals we set out for this competition? Did we put our best effort towards our goals, which is really what matters? Did we learn? What did we learn? And how can we do better next time? Those are the things we want to be asking ourselves after every event and after every season. And if you honestly go through this process, season over season, you will get so much better. And you will learn so much. So before 2026 starts, you should define your pre and post-match scouting or pre and post-match routine. If you don't have any, you should get one. But if you do have one, you should try to refine it in a way that helps you to grow as much as you can. So try to get as much better as you can every match. Have a plan to scout as well as you can. I know some teams, scouting is going to be one guy in the stands with a notebook. And on other teams, there's going to be 27 people involved. But as well as you can, it does matter so much. And then make sure you're aligning your team on your season goals. Everybody pushing in one direction is going to do so much better than everybody pushing in different directions. So make sure you get that done. Any questions? Oh, yeah.
What do you mean by pre and post-match review?
Yeah. So this is our pre-match strategy. We, the analysts bring to the drive team the data, and then we have a sequence that we do before a match where we talk amongst ourselves to try to figure out what we think the best way that the match is going to unfold would be. That's our pre-match routine. And then we go talk to our partners, and then we get the drive team ready, and then we go out and play. And then our post-match routine is the review that we do afterwards, where the analyst brings us the video, and we watch together and try to improve. Other questions? Yeah.
This is, I think, a more like trivial question, but when you're scouting, if your team is playing, do you scout your own bot, or do you like send that scout like on a break or something?
We absolutely scout our own robot, and you know why? Because we want to know where we are in the field. Like if we're the third best robot, I need to know that. Right? If we're the fifth best robot, I need to know that. If we're the best robot, I need to know that. Right? Because I want to be able to predict where I get picked. Right? So, like, yes, absolutely, scout yourself. Do not send your scouts on break until after their shift is over, obviously. Anybody else? Yeah.
Is the predictor like software that you guys developed? Or?
Yeah, the predictor is actually pretty finicky. It literally just takes, it just sums them all up. So if your average is, if you average 5 pieces and she averages 8 pieces and he averages 12 pieces, it will just assume that you can score all that, and it'll just sum it all up and give you a score. And amazingly, it's actually pretty close most of the time, even though it'll tell us often that an alliance can score 24 L4s. It's well, that's clearly not true, but yeah, it works out. And it's not necessarily about what the score is. It's just about who's contributing, what is the contribution, what's the total number that we're looking at that we have to play against. Yeah.
What questions did you ask teams during the competition?
For pit scouting, you mean?
Yeah, for scouting.
Yeah, so when we pit scout, we primarily want to ask questions that are not matters of opinion, that are matters of what is actually happening here. Things like, where do you want to get your pieces from? What size is your robot? What drivetrain do you use? Stuff like that. We don't want to say how many pieces can you score, or how consistent are you at climbing? Because even though they're probably going to give you their best intention to answer, it's almost never correct.
So less how good are you at this, more what do you guys do?
Yeah, answers that have a concrete answer. How do you want to play? Where do you want to get your pieces from? What is your goal with this robot? Are you an algae robot? Are you a coral robot? Are you both? Things that you can give me a yes or no to would be great. Things that, how many pieces do you score? Oh, I score between 10 and 11 pieces every match. And then my data shows you score 4 to 5 pieces every match. Those are not useful to ask.
And we should be taking notes of the team's performance during matches.
Yes, absolutely. That is the most important thing. For sure. All right, guys, looks like we're out of time. If you guys have any more questions, feel free to come up and talk, but thank you so much.